It's 4:31. We will call the meeting to the order. We will start with the roll call. Madeline.
All right. President Abbas.
Present.
Vice President Martin. Alder Carter. Alder Bennett. Alder McKinney. Alder Heck.
Here.
Alder Lemmer.
Here.
Alder Wahelier.
Here.
All right.
We do have a quorum. Thank you very much. IT staff, could you please do a quick announcement?
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Panelists also have the ability to add pronouns after their names if they choose. Please do not alter the current naming convention. Simply add text after your name. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I appreciate that. Next is public comments. I do believe, Madeline, I just checked the system. We don't have any public comments at this moment, correct?
No, not at this moment. We do have one individual registered for item number 3, though.
Yes.
And they would like to speak.
I saw that. Thank you very much. Next is disclosures and recusal. This is opportunity for anyone of us to disclose or recuse. I do not see any hand raised. So thank you very much. We move to next agenda item number 2, file number 66891, update item housing encampment. Either Madam Mayor or Jim O'Keefe, whoever want to take a lead from here.
Thank you, President Abbas. Good to see all of you. I will start and then hand this over to Jim, who's probably better equipped to answer your questions than I am. But I just wanted to give you all an overview on where we are at with the encampment issue, and to provide the sort of bigger context. Again, I think you all know, but just as a refresher for anybody listening, over the course of the pandemic, the city and the county have cooperated to really completely transform the way we deal with people experiencing homelessness in our community. We moved the shelters. We moved, I guess, 2 of the 3 shelters. The men's shelter moved first to Warner Park and now to First Street, and hopefully soon to yet another location. Looking for a permanent location. We may need another temporary one in between. The women's shelter has remained at the Salvation Army on East Washington, but the families shelter has moved out of that building to the old Carmenta building, now called Shield of Hope, which I think has been a really successful location for those families. Last I checked in with that, we do have families that are moving into housing from that location, and so they are able to continue to accommodate new families as needed. And then at the same time, the county has been housing to the tune of millions of dollars folks that are experiencing homelessness that are particularly vulnerable to COVID in hotels. And that continues, although they are now trying to place people from hotels into housing. That situation with hotels, I think, will continue yet for some time, thanks to the county's financial support for that. However, as we all know, there are some individuals that have chosen for one reason or another not to take advantage of any of those options for shelter and are choosing to camp outdoors, most prominently in Rindell Park, although certainly not exclusively. There are folks who are camping in other places as well. But I think our most pressing issue is the encampment at Rindell. You all are familiar with the actions that the council has taken on this issue. Staff have been working almost literally day and night to try and find other options that we could feel confident in offering to people as an alternative to this encampment or to shelter, to the men's shelter or either of the other shelters. There is not a simple response or solution. There probably is not one solution to the situation at Rindell. Nor is there a single constituency that requires a response. Everyone, including the folks who live around the park, park users, the folks in the encampment, the advocates, and more, are all anxious to see progress on this issue. And frankly, no one is more impatient than I am on this. And I think if you ask staff how testy I have gotten with them about this issue, they can attest to the fact that I am very impatient to see progress here. But nonetheless, our staff have been working very hard to find better and safer alternatives for the folks who are currently camping at Rindell. The issue obviously is complicated by the larger picture of both the pandemic and our housing crisis, and the lack of availability of housing that's available to people who are very low or no income in our community. But we are taking a number of specific actions, which I will go through briefly, and then Jim can elaborate on, and certainly happy to take all of your questions on these. The first thing that we're working on is to set up an alternative temporary, what we're calling shelter campground, that would provide a safer and more secure option for folks that are currently camping, and that would also provide experienced management of the site. So we're looking for temporary locations to accommodate up to 30 people each. And I say locations because I don't think we want to get much bigger than that. And we're going to obviously need more than one. I don't even want to speculate how many at this point, but more than one to accommodate all the folks that are currently at Rindell. And that doesn't even talk about folks that might be camped in other places. The first proposed location is at 3202 Dairy Drive. It's across the street from Fire Station 14. We are looking
looks like
yeah,
looks like she may have frozen.
Yeah. Yeah, we could.
I'll stop her video. I think she's probably dropping off here, it looks like.
And Stefan, I got a message from Alder Juliana Bennett, Alder Bennett, and she doesn't have access to her city email address, having a hard time getting on a city email address. Is it possible to send on her personal email address?
Yeah, do we have that anywhere? Is there anywhere I can find that?
I do have, and I can just email you her personal email address.
Yeah, could you do that?
I can do that. Thank you very much. The mayor is here. Sorry, Mayor, we lost you.
Yeah, my apologies. I'm going to call in on my phone because I was having more luck with that earlier today in terms of the audio. So give me just a second to switch my audio.
That sounds good. Stefan, your last name is King, correct?
No, Precourt.
Okay. Got it. Oh, I'm sending you right now.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, madam.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. My apologies. So I'm not sure where you lost me, but I just wanted to be clear that any site that we move forward.
We hear you, Madam Mayor. That was cut off at you mentioned site number 1, and then it cut off. So.
Okay, so the first site we're proposing is the site on Dairy Drive, across from Fire Station 14. Options for a second site are being looked at, in some of which are public land, others of which are private. We'd need to purchase. Either way, we'd need council approval for the sites, and we will. Any site we use for this purpose, including Dairy Drive, will need the appropriate zoning for this use. It will need the appropriate state licensure, so the campground permit. And so we will have to work through those. But I will be asking the council to approve staff beginning work at Dairy Drive before we finish the required processes for zoning and the campground permit. And I'll be asking you to consider and pass a resolution at the next meeting to authorize staff to do that work in advance of the zoning approvals, similar to what we did for the second OM Village. We approved them moving forward before they had their formal zoning approval, and then we granted their formal zoning approval after the fact. So similar process to that. We will have that resolution text and a memo regarding it to you in the next couple of days, I hope. I want to be super clear for everybody that our goal here is to provide better, safer accommodations as we approach winter, including at least semi-climate controlled living units, facilities that would provide running water, bathroom and showers, electric connections, fencing, and parking. And in fact, this will be hopefully public soon, but we have gotten a generous donation from a local business of a building that we can use to house the bathrooms and showers. And a resolution to accept this donation, I hope will be before you at the next council meeting. So stay tuned for details. And I hope that this could be the first of many donations to help support this work, because it is going to require considerable commitment of funds to make this happen. We, in addition to the capital expenses, we are anticipating needing on-site support staff to help folks with finding permanent housing and to support behavioral health issues and to provide security for the folks that will be living at these sites. That's going to look like somewhere in the ballpark of 1.5 to 2 million per site. We have the funds for one site in the ARPA allocation. If we move to look at another site, we're going to have to find funding for that as well. So the more that we can get donations from the private sector to support this work, the better. Just a few other things before I turn it over to Jim. The first is that in addition to moving on to create a site for a shelter campground, I've also asked city staff to work with any willing partners, whether that's folks that are camping at Rindall, service providers, advocates, people who use the park, residents who live near the park, to start addressing the health and safety concerns at the park, including by developing a safety plan that would be accepted by the folks camping there and would be enforced by city staff. The second thing that I want to be 100% clear on is that with the creation of these alternative sites, it is my intent, and I hope yours as well, to end the encampment at Rindall Park. Not by kicking people out of the park with nowhere to go, but by providing them options that are better than the current situation at Rindall, whether that's moving into housing, going into shelter, or going into a new shelter campground that we create, or possibly going into the hotels that are being provided. But I do not think that the situation at Rindall can go on as it is currently, and I think that we need to work diligently to bring it to an end and find people other options for housing. So that's my piece. Jim, is there anything that you want to add, or should we go to questions?
Mayor, I want to attest to your testiness on this subject as one who's been on the receiving end of some of that, but otherwise, that I would take my direction from members of the committee for where they would like to go with the discussion. If there are questions, I'm happy to try to respond to them.
Thanks, Jim. President Abbas, do you want to facilitate, or would you like me to?
You are great at facilitating, so you please go ahead.
All right, happy to. Alder Wahilahi, I believe your hand was up first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So 2 questions. One question is, has the alders in those districts been involved? If it's a daily drive, I assume it's Alder, is it Jail?
It's Alder Curry, yes.
Yeah, Alder Curry, yes.
Has she been involved in this discussion process?
Yes, Alder, we have been in, and I personally have been in close contact with Alder Curry in the last week or so as plans around this site have really begun to come together, yes.
And then also Alder, I don't want to mispronounce the name, Gary also for the present encampment. Has he been involved with this process as well? Moving out of the encampment from his district.
So I have been also in regular contact with Alder Halverson and spoke to him as recently as late last week about the work that we're doing that the mayor described, yes.
Okay. And my other question is, as the mayor alluded to, the resolution that's coming forward to the council meeting, it's more of not the encampment, but redistricting, rezoning. Is that how I understood, or?
So, although there will be 2 things hopefully coming before you at the next council meeting, pending talking to President Abbas about both of them. But this is all coming together relatively quickly. The first will be to accept the donation of a building for use at a shelter campground. And then the second will be, sorry, I apologize. There's actually 3 categories of things that you'll be asked to vote on, right? So the first is the donation. The second is the underlying changes to the zoning code to allow what we're calling a shelter campground. I think the code calls it something slightly different. My apologies. And tiny house villages. So those are working their way through the committee process right now. And then the other thing that I hope will be before you at the next meeting is permission for staff to start work on establishing a shelter campground before the Dairy Drive site has the approved zoning. Because the current process for the zoning changes, we need to amend the zoning code, and then we need to change the zoning for the site, which will take until November to finish that process. So I don't feel like it's acceptable to wait until November to start the process of building the shelter campground. I think we need to start tomorrow, but I'll wait until you all vote on it. Frankly, I think we needed to start 2 months ago. Anyway, sorry. But the point is that I don't think we can wait. And so I'll be asking you for permission to get started while we also at the same time work on the rezoning and the campground permit.
And you mentioned as a follow-up committee that's working on, which committee is that?
So the committees that are seeing the zoning change, and actually Alder Heck might know better than I, but it's the City County Homeless Issues Committee, Plan Commission, and I believe there's one more. Alder Heck, if you want to unmute, you can share that with us. There you go.
Thanks. Yes, it was recommended for passage by Plan Commission last night, and it still has to go to Homeless Issues Committee on the 30th, I believe.
And then it'll come to the council meeting after that.
For next week, 31st? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alder. President Abbas?
Thank you very much for the presentation and update. And thank you, Jim, and the staff members putting so much effort. Jim explained that resolution quite a bit to me. For the purpose of knowledge and for the people who are listening, one clarity question about budget. So you mentioned 1 million to 1.5 million. I'm just curious how much will be the capital, how much will be the operational. Also, the follow-up question to that is, with in ARPA, we saw there is a clear intent from the city and from the council to also engage other partner stakeholders for fundraising. With this particular encampment, what is the operational cost vision? Are we going to take all the operational cost every year, or it is more like we're going to also engage other stakeholders for fundraising as well? That's one question. And
Jim, can you speak to the details of the budget?
Some, and they are still coming together. The mayor mentioned the donation of the building that will become the Center for Bathroom and Shower Facilities. That was not anticipated when these budgets were being preliminarily prepared, and we believe that will save us a little bit of money to go that route. But the capital improvements, and this includes the acquisition of the pallet shelter structures that we have been exploring, will total in the neighborhood of between $900,000 and $1 million. That's to prepare the site. It's to extend services, connect to public water and sanitary sewer. It's to bring electrical power to individual campsites. It includes fencing, so there are a lot of site prep costs that are part of that. We're also continuing to work with with nonprofit organizations to develop a budget for a staffing plan and management plan of the campsite. We've received some preliminary numbers that suggest that annual operating cost is going to be in the neighborhood of about $750,000. It'll include a big part of it for staff positions, including professionally trained positions that can work with specific needs of campsite users. There are also accommodations in it for things like transportation, but it's very much a work in progress. But I'd put that estimate at about $750,000.
Thank you very much. And my second question is, Madam Mayor, you mentioned about the safety plan for Rindle Park, and I'm curious about the timeline for that plan and how that plan looked like. Either that plan is going to be shared with the Common Council. I'm just curious to get more information on that.
Alder, similarly, I think we should have had it 2 months ago, but here we are. So I don't know that staff are far enough in to really have any more details. But I will say that this is a multi-agent, multi-department and effort, and also that it's really important that it be done in collaboration with the service providers, the advocates, and the folks, the campers themselves. So that's going to require some time and conversation. But Jim, do you want to add anything to that?
Only that we are making every effort to work with service providers that are working with users of Rindle Park. We have certainly heard a lot of input from neighborhood residents. We've begun conversations with and intend to have more conversations with campers. As the mayor mentioned, there are multiple city agencies involved, and it's really focused on making that campsite and that camp more broadly a safer and more hospitable place than it is. Just to use one example, there's a fair amount of vehicular traffic in and through the park and along the bike path. So there are safety concerns that address both campers and other park users, and it's our intent to develop some guidelines and work with people to improve the safety and overall health and safety of that location.
Thanks, Jim. And quick follow-up question is about the timeline for Rindle, and especially with Dairy Drive. If everything moves forward, as the mayor mentioned about resolutions, what the timeline we're looking at?
A lot of the timeline is going to hinge on, I think, two things. Thing one would be the work that will need to be done to install services, the water and sanitary sewer connections, electrical power, etc. It may be that the donation of the trailer may hasten that a little bit, but I believe that the estimates the most recent estimates that we had received from city engineering staff was that it could take 4 to 5 weeks to prepare that site. So probably in that 4-week range. The other factor here is the ability to secure and have delivered the pallet shelter structures that we've talked about. It would be our hope to have those on site and assembled when the campsite opens. We've considered the possibility of if there is a delay in the delivery of those structures, that we might begin using tents, but I think it's the desire of most people that we have those structures on site and assembled when the campsite opens.
Thank you very much.
So as you can see, there's a lot of moving pieces here, where we want to make sure that we're providing individual shelter structures, which if you think about how the second OM village progressed, they started with the canistogas, and then we're moving into tiny houses. We have not 100% settled on what that is, and where we might purchase them from, or when they, as Jim indicated, they might be delivered. So I think that needs to be settled before we can have real clarity on the time frame.
Thank you. I appreciate the update.
Thank you. Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. How quickly do you think on-site staffing could be provided for the Dairy Drive location? It sounds like we have a lot of information from potential service providers about what it would take. Would that be able to come together pretty quickly? As in, the community partners that we've been talking to and staff management or on-site management.
I think it's more than likely, Alder Lemmers, that there will need to be additional staff brought on. I can imagine that community agencies that we work with might be able to redeploy existing staff, maybe to cover some portion of the staffing at this new location, but they're going to need a little bit of time to bring on staff and prepare them to support this or other new locations.
Okay.
I can't speak specifically how long that might take them, but I think they all understand the urgency of the work that we're trying to do, and they're willing to do everything they can to support it.
All right, thank you. And I have a question about the safety plan being worked on for Rindal. You mentioned that we would have city staff support, like they're executing the plan. Would that be community development folks mostly?
I think it's probably likely to be parks folks, Alder, okay. But TBD.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for right now.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter.
Thank you. I'm at an appointment, so I don't have my video on. My question is twofold. One is, are we also working on a security plan for the Dairy Drive location so that it will be implemented when it opens?
Yes, Alder, and it'll be a very different situation. The site is similar to the OM villages. The site will be fenced and secured, so it won't be open to anyone to come in. It will only be open to the folks that are actually living there and service providers. So yes, they're part of that process of bringing on service providers will be to make sure that we're attending to the security, mostly for the security and safety of the folks that will be living on the site. But it is also a requirement of the zoning that we intend to zone the site into, presuming the city council passes the zoning amendment. Sorry, there's a lot of ifs in that statement.
Yes, indeed.
But anyway, there is a requirement in the proposed zoning changes for a safety plan.
My other question is, and if I hope I heard this correctly, is that the Dairy Drive site would eventually transition into tiny homes. My question is, knowing about all about encampments that we now know, is that zoning will be used for future encampments? Or I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, Alder, it's a good question. I mean, I think everyone at this point is thinking of any encampments as temporary, when temporary could be taken to mean a year or two, but not long term. And then that we're trying to set up a zoning solution where you can have a shelter campground, a temporary encampment that's managed legally, right? Because one of the challenges has been that there hasn't been any way in our zoning code to legally camp within the city of Madison, and that the tiny house zoning would be the long-term permanent solution from a zoning perspective. But I think that we collectively are going to have to wrestle with the question of what are the ongoing needs of our community, and are there always going to be some folks who are experiencing homelessness who are not comfortable using a congregate shelter for whatever reason? And are we going to need to accommodate that in some way? I don't know that needs to be at Dairy Drive. But for example, we may think of, anyway, I don't want to freak anybody out, but just for example, you could think of when we do have a permanent men's shelter site, might there be space for people who would prefer to car camp on that same lot, but then they could use the shelters and bathrooms in the congregate shelter. So I just think that we're going to need to really think through what the long-term solutions are. But at this point, we are not planning on the Dairy Drive site being a permanent solution, but rather a year or two solution.
Yes, I think my only concern is that we look towards the future, but with a vision that there's always going to be a need. It might not be a need at that location, but I know that transitional housing 40 years ago said if we open up our basement and put sleeping bags down there, we will end homelessness. And 40 years later, we're still dealing with it. So I just want to have a lens that looks towards the future and where we need to go. And if this zoning can cover more than just a single site, that would be good.
Yes, Alder, your point is well taken. The zoning district will be available to cover multiple sites, I completely agree with you that we need to think realistically about the long term here. And I suspect that one venue for doing that may be the process around developing a new purpose-built shelter, because we're going to need to do a significant amount of community engagement in the process of creating, once we settle on a site, then we engage in the process of planning and programming and thinking about what will happen on that site. And that may be the opportunity to really talk about the larger needs. So something to stay tuned for, I think.
Thank you very much.
Alder, yeah, thank you, Alder. Alder Bennett.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Apologies for being late. currently on vacation and completely lost track of time with LA traffic. So it is what it is. But I'm here, so I'm sorry if I asked a question that you already addressed. I was wondering, one of the major issues or questions regarding the Dairy Drive site is transportation, because it isn't really near a convenience store or just regular everyday things like laundry, going to Walmart, etc., that people want to go to. So how will we be providing transportation to these folks?
Yeah, thanks, Older. It's a good question. It actually, I believe, is relatively near a convenience store. And it's about maybe a little bit over a half an hour to a little bit under an hour bus ride to the Capitol. And obviously there are, services like laundry or food grocery stores a lot closer to the site than the Capitol. So it is, I think, relatively possible to function on the bus from this site, but we will also be looking at how else we can support folks who might need transportation to and from the site.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. And then with the setup that we have, what is the plan, for example, if something breaks at in someone's facility or where someone's staying? Will the city go out and service that, or what's that plan?
So, Alder, again, I think it kind of depends on what structure solution we end up settling on. But if we're providing a structure for folks to live in, then I think we would be handling the maintenance on it.
Okay, cool. And regarding people that are, or residents that are staying at Rindall at this current point in time, there has been, of several major thunderstorms, even our tornado warnings, etc. And living in the best time to be experiencing that. And a lot of folks were hoping to go into the buildings, the building facilities nearby that the parks owned. I understand that parks were okay with residents using it temporarily, or opening it temporarily, and they needed confirmation from the mayor's office. So will you be providing that confirmation for folks to be able to use those emergency facilities when there's major acts of God happening?
Sorry, I muted myself. None of the buildings in Rindall Park, to my knowledge, are rated for tornado shelters. So they're not appropriate for storm shelters. And I will say that I believe, and Alder Heck, I'll look to confirmation from you, that we included in the management plan that's required under the new zoning to have a storm shelter or tornado shelter plan in place. Is that correct?
We've included a provision to have a severe weather plan, and we haven't mapped out exactly what that will consist of or needs to consist of yet.
All right, thank you, Alder. So Alder Bennett, in one way or another, under the new zoning, any of these sites will be required to have severe weather plans, which certainly would include tornadoes, but also would include extreme heat or cold. And that's something that we'll have to develop for, frankly, any of the sites, including, I would assume, the tiny house villages going forward, or whoever is managing them will have to develop.
Right, definitely. And folks that are at Rindall right now, what do we say to them if there's a major storm happening and they need to go someplace safe?
Well, although the first and most obvious solution would be for them to go into the appropriate shelter, all of which have accommodations for severe weather. And failing that, there are other structures in our community that are open to the public and are used as storm shelters or as extreme heat or cold shelters. So the plan for storms and tornadoes is the same as the plan for extreme heat or cold. It's a notification of what options are for folks and then to let people make their own choices.
Okay, I guess I can follow up later on that too. Thank you. I agree this solution should have been here 2 months ago, but personally, I remember 2 months ago the city was evicting people in parks. And I think that this is an issue that's been happening for years, so it's really a solution that we should have had years ago. And I appreciate the work that staff is doing for this and all the service providers and just organizers that have been helping out.
Thank you, Alder Miadze.
Hello. Good evening, Mayor and city staff, and it's good to hear about this location. I just had a quick question. I heard you say that it was going to be fenced in location. Just wondering if it's going to be allowable for fire trucks and other city vehicles to go in, because I remember I sent you a text about there was twice where there was fire trucks that went to this location all in the matter of hours in one day. So I'm just wondering, are there going to be rules and regulations for this new place rather than have the same problems be duplicated at another place? I know you guys are talking about safety wise, but I'm just saying, is there still going to be rules and regulations for this other encampment area?
It's Alder, like any residential property, there will need to be access for both fire and EMS. And so, yes, of course, they'll have access to the site. And yes, as part of the process of managing the site, there will be, I think, some ground rules required for residents on the site.
Thank you. That's something for the alders to be able to take a look at before the transferring of sites?
Alder, I think that is really an operational function that staff will be working on with whichever agency is managing the site. I don't think that's something that would come to the council for approval.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Just a couple questions, or one comment and one question. For those that are following those two resolutions, there is a state statute already linked to it that contains a lot of the information that has been asked in here. So we're still following the encampments rules from the state, which includes security and audits and all that stuff. So it's not like we can just go rogue here. So I strongly suggest that when you are looking at the resolutions, take a quick look at that. That statute is extensive, very long. Use your control find and look for keywords of interest so you can survive it. My suggestion there. And then the second question is a follow-up to President Abbas' question earlier on regards of the timeline on when are we closing Randall. I think we all want to close Randall. I think we're marching to the same goal here, but I just want to really be sure that it's clear that, or Jim can further his answer on this one, that just opening the Dairy Drive location doesn't mean we can just cut off ties with Randall. We still have to have some controls around Randall to avoid to keep that under control. But we need that second location to also be decided or purchased or whatever we need to do about it in order to finalize the complete close to Randall. Is that correct, Jim? I mean, I just want people to be clear what we're trying to do here, that we cannot move everyone from Randall into the dairy location and then say, oh, we're done.
Yeah, Alder, that's correct. I think we'll need at least 2 other sites beyond Rindle or 2 other solutions. And you're correct that while the dairy drive will come first, and hopefully we'll be able to move 30 or so people from Rindle to Dairy Drive. There's more than 30 people at Rindle right now. So it isn't going to be a sufficient solution. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
Yeah, I just really want to be very transparent about that. That opening that location doesn't mean, oh, we're done with this. We really have more to go. And we all agreeing, yes, we all want Randall to be restored, but dairy drive doesn't solve the entire issue. Anyhow, that was it. Those 2 comments. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Alder. I think those are all the alders that have questions. Are there any other questions? All right, President Abbas, I'll turn it back to you then.
Thank you very much for the update. We will move next to agenda item number 3, file number 67057, which is an update on violence prevention. And we have one public speaker, Shannon Waterfield, Menominee Street, Chicago, neither in support nor opposed, and want to speak. Shannon?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Shannon Waterfield. I live in the city of Chicago. I just dropped my 2 kids off last Monday on the campus of University of Wisconsin. Actually, I live off campus, one on Langdon and one on Gilman. And my husband and I were driving back from Madison relieved to get our kids out of the city of Chicago. We live in the heart of Chicago, and the city of Chicago, and I'm not sure if many of your Alder people read the Chicago paper or are in tune with the amount of crime that's going on in Chicago. But I was relieved that my kids got back to what I thought would be a very safe place called campus. Sadly, my daughter woke me up on Tuesday morning with some photos of a couple of gentlemen out there shooting very large guns. And it was an incredible sight. And I think I'm hoping that the mayor received the emails that I sent. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping that you all will get a copy of that. But what I found out is that wasn't just the first incident. In fact, there was an incident near Camp Randall on Saturday, which I'm sure all of you heard about, the young man that was shot in a drive-by shooting. Actually, there have been 6 shootings in downtown Madison since June. And there was another drive-by shooting actually on Saturday night on the other side of Gilman. And there is an 80% increase in crime in Madison. Yet you have a shrinking police force, and you're going to have a bigger decrease in a police force after your budget meetings. I was able to facilitate a meeting on Thursday. I drove back to campus and met with Christina Olstead, the Dean of Students. I met with Katie Crawley, the Deputy Mayor of the Office of Mayor. I met with Alder Verveer of the 4th District. I met with Officer Craig Kalka from the State Street Neighborhood Office, City of Madison Police. And I met with Officer Diego Hernandez, Campus Police Liaison. And it seems that all of them, the conclusion I came to after I facilitated a meeting with all of them, as I met with them all at 1:00 last Thursday, is no one knows what to do. And so I would like to know what the game plan is to protect all of our kids who are moving on to campus. We have a lot of the freshmen are starting to move on actually this week. I talked to Katie Crawley last night, and she asked me what my asks were. Now, my ask and what is real, I'm not sure. But if you guys understand what the state of that we're a cautionary tale for the city of Madison, because I know for a fact that, and the police officer Craig Kalka confirmed that you have gang-related activity, and those gang members are coming from Chicago to Madison because of the opportunity that's there. So my asks are, and I have a few. One is my ask is to conduct a major offense around campus, meaning you should be using all your units, your gang units, your K9 units, and block off streets to avoid the drive-by shootings and unwelcome these criminals who are putting our kids in danger. My number 2 ask is to install more cameras. There was a camera on Gilman when this shooting took place last Tuesday morning. There was also a person that was actually shot on June 24th on Gilman in the same area. I asked the officer about the camera that I was told about, and he told me that that camera was not working. So to corroborate all the evidence and to help the case, we didn't have a lot except for the fact that my daughter took videos and photos. My next request is to have more communication between the campus police and the Madison the Madison jurisdiction issue that can be rectified, but it should be rectified.
Sharon, sorry to interrupt you. Your time is over. Would you quickly wrap up?
My wrap is exactly what are you going to do about it?
Thank you very much for your time and coming here and giving your testimony. Madam Mayor, update item is violence prevention. Floor is yours.
Thank you, President Abbas. Appreciate, again, the time here. I will just say a few things, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ariel Smith to talk about public health work and the violence prevention unit. I think the first thing, I'd say two really important things. And firstly, we all know, I hope, that gun violence has been up significantly during the pandemic. And that's a very, very disturbing trend. It's a national trend. When I speak with other mayors around the country, they're all experiencing the same problems. And I do think that it is heavily related to the pandemic. That said, shots fired are actually down from last year. So my hope is that we are moving in the right direction. As we start to move out of, can we say that yet, out of the pandemic? Not quite, but start to reopen more things. I'm hopeful that will help. I'm also hopeful that the work that we're doing, again, through public health is starting to bear fruit. And then finally, I'll just remind us that although the formal work of violence reduction and prevention is coming through public health, there's a number of things that we're investing in as a city that support violence reduction and violence prevention, including some of our initial ARPA allocations this year, in which we're supporting youth employment and engagement both this fall and next year. I think we're going to need to continue to build the cooperation and collaboration between public health and community development to make sure that the funding that we allocate through community development is at least in part directed through a violence prevention lens. I think that's going to be increasingly important as we go forward. And so I encourage all of you, as you think about the community development allocations, and as those RFPs come around, for us to all be thinking about that through a violence prevention lens, as well as addressing other needs. So I think that's enough from me. Ariel, would you just give us an update on the Violence Prevention Unit and where your work is at?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, committee. Some of the things that our Violence Prevention Unit and team are working on are in the realm of our Community Safety Intervention team. So as a reminder, that work is a collaborative partnership between public health, law enforcement, both from MPD and a few other municipalities, Dane County Human Services, Focused Interruption Coalition, and a few other partners that hopefully I won't be remiss in not naming them all. But we work together to not only identify at-risk individuals, but also provide response to instances that have happened by deploying community resources to victims and perpetrators of violence. And that is in order to prevent violence and reduce recidivism of violence. So we are in an evolutionary phase, as I like to call it, with the CSIT, or the Community Safety Intervention Team. We're exploring different options for deploying these resources to better meet the need of those we serve and most effective. So we've received some feedback and done a little bit of research and homework as to other models that are being deployed, not only in the US, but also in Canada. They have a strong model there of community safety intervention teams. And so we're looking to kind of alter or change our response protocols just a little bit to meet the need a little bit better and give us a little bit wider of a scope and range as to which we can deploy these services. The other big project our team is working on is our Community Safety Direct Outreach Program, or our kind of also known as our Community Safety Direct Outreach Workers or teams. And so we're working with the current funding that was produced via CDD and the COVID/violence prevention RFP and those awardees. We're working with them to develop our Community Safety Direct Outreach Program. That is being done with community agency Bridging the Gap and also with Focused Interruption, who are both of our awardees for that grant, to develop a model in which we can sustain the community safety worker pilot project, and that will morph into our Community Safety Direct Outreach Worker Program. And so again, that is used to prevent and de-escalate low and mid-level conflict. And so we're working closely with MPD and 911 dispatch to figure out better ways that we can connect those resources from a calls for service perspective. And we're also examining the calls for service data to determine where we may want to expand the pilot first. And if given the opportunity, maybe in multiple geographical locations. So stay tuned as we are planning to hopefully wrap up the development of that program and model by the end of the year. So that is our plan. Last but certainly not least is our work with the Madison and Dane County Violence Prevention Coalition. So we are currently working on scoping the priorities that the coalition had identified for wanting to roll out in 2022. And looking at the potential receipt of the ARPA funding in the tune of about $1.2 million to really allocate via RFP to our community organizations who are delivering those services and providing those interventions and healing services. So looking to not only develop what the funding mechanism for that will be via the RFP, but also looking to how we can make that a part of our more systematic approach to violence prevention and reduction, and how do those services and those community agencies, one, live within our bigger ecosystem of violence prevention and reduction, but two, also have adequate support and funding for all that we're asking them to do and contribute. So those are the three major things that our team is working on right now. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ariel. Are there questions for Ariel about the Violence Prevention Unit's work? Alder Heck?
Thank you. And thank you, Ariel, for all that good information. I'm wondering, like, how you're starting to get the word out in the community, you know, not just PR, but actually getting the word out about the work that's coming up that's going to be so important. It appears that even people from Chicago are interested in this topic. So it'll be interesting to hear, you know, how you're going to get that word out.
Question. So I would say currently it's mostly via Public Health's website. We are working with our communication team, who is a little tied up because of COVID right now, but we've been working with them to develop a more comprehensive comms plan. that will include not only kind of newsletters that can go out to the community, but hopefully also a few media briefs or blasts so that people really understand the services that are available to them. And as we get some of these more direct service programs online, especially those that may ask for a different way to call for service, that we're making sure we're advertising them as wide as possible so they're accessible as possible.
Great, thank you. I encourage you to use Alder's avenues of communication that we have as often as possible. Thanks.
Absolutely, I'll take you guys up on that.
Thank you, Alder Bennett.
Hi. Two-part question. So this program that you're developing, does that tie into the coalition, the Violence Prevention Coalition's roadmap to reducing violence? And kind of how is that, how are you building upon that roadmap to reducing violence? Are you, or what is like kind of the 411 on that?
Yeah, great question. So to answer the first part of your question, the answer is yes. One of the areas that was identified in the roadmap based on feedback from community and service partners and just kind of a general situational awareness of what we were looking to do around violence prevention and reduction showed that we needed a kind of conduit or gap, filling of the gap, I should say, around low and mid-level conflict de-escalation. So working with some of the data we get from law enforcement, we recognize that there's quite a few calls for service that could maybe be handled in a different way that doesn't involve law enforcement and that could be more supportive of providing tools and resources for residents to kind of self-solve some of their conflicts or at least find community resources and partners that could help them with that. So that was part of why this model was developed, and Focused Interruption really kind of took the lead in piloting this project on the West Side through a BCJI grant that MPD had received. And so in a lot of ways, we're building out that pilot project with a bigger program model involvement so that we can make it as sustainable as possible as we are seeing some indicators of success.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah. And what was my other question? Kind of building off of Alder Het's question, in my conversation with Central's captain today, part of like the big thing that, you know, we need to identify is that we can't simply like police our way out of this issue. As much as it seems like we cannot. And I guess, or one thing that we talked about was not only putting money towards the services, but making sure that those are getting to the people and particularly to our youth. So I guess diving like deeper into Alder Het's question, like how are you making like an intentional effort to reach out to like the youngest of our city?
Yeah, good question. I would say we're addressing that in two parts. Part of what this community safety intervention team / CSIT revamp is looking at a different model to assess some of our at-risk or high-risk youth. And how do we make connections with them? I'll be honest, our current assessment or system process is not great because it waits for them to already be just as involved. And so we're really looking at different strategies that will help us reach youth before that happens as a different way of looking at the prevention lens. I would also say that, yes, you are correct. Law enforcement intervention can't be the only solution. And so as we look to other models of prevention and how we're going to reach kind of our general youth population, a lot of that work, I think, is being done with our CDD partners and a lot of the positive youth development and positive youth opportunities work that they're conducting. And so we really have started to develop a stronger relationship with CDD and working with them in conjunction with some of the funding and opportunities that they release for youth.
Sweet, thank you. And lastly, obviously gun violence has been a major issue that's picking up this summer. And, you know, I represent the campus or the greater campus area. And, you know, when 17-year-old Javon Freely got shot, that is quite concerning. And concerns the residents as well. So just like for us alders, like what are one or two key messages that you would like to like send, or that you believe that residents should know regarding gun violence?
Yeah, great question. I think one message I would like residents to hear is that shots fired are going down. And so there is indication that the methods and prevention strategies that we are implementing, they're showing some promise. I can't say definitively that they're working, but they're definitely showing promise. I think the other big piece that I would like residents to know is that we are open here to suggestions and feedback to those who are living in communities that are experiencing gun violence. They know there's communities best. We can take a lot of the best practice and science and do feedback sessions and listening sessions all we want to, but if we're not hearing from the people who are directly impacted on what they would like to see or what would make them feel most safe, then we have challenges then with fulfilling them. And so I'd say those are the two things I think that would be helpful from our perspective.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. President Abbas?
Yeah, thank you very much for a really good presentation and discussing about the program. I have a financial question. We all know ARPA is more like a temporarily steroid, just an injection to make this more sustainable. I'm just curious about what type of commitment from Dane County and funding wise, or what you're exactly, how could we make this more sustainable? Also would be nice for us as a council to know too.
Great question. So we are actually in conversation with the county. We have a follow-up meeting, I believe, this week to discuss exactly that, of how we make this sustainable, recognizing from the county perspective, violence doesn't stop at City of Madison borders. And if we're going to do this work effectively, we really need to have an approach that doesn't limit our service providers or our efforts based on jurisdictional boundaries. So that's one conversation we are having. And as we develop and build stronger relationships with our Dane County Human Services partners specifically, and also some of the municipality law enforcement agencies, it would be helpful for us to kind of just have a better coordinated approach between the city and the county. And so I think that's one way that public health, being a dual entity, is kind of leveraging our relationships with both the city and the county to build a system that really works with both entities. So from a finance perspective, I can't give too much more yet as we haven't entered budget season yet, but we are looking to have both the city and the county contribute to violence prevention moving forward.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Abbas. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Hi, Ariel. I never know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, so please feel free to shut me down if I'm not. So thank you. I just want to say thank you for all the hard work you guys are doing. And I will echo Patrick, Alder Heck's feedback on using our updates on our blogs to share your information. But I again, being a data-driven crazy person, I love to see those numbers. I mean, I just went through an exercise that took me literally like 2 weeks to better understand the juvenile system, how that works, what are all the processes that are in place, the statutes that are in place, and again, looking at the data that the Dane County has provided, showing how numbers keep going down when it comes to violence. I mean, I was at a meeting just this Saturday with where the chief also brought up the statistics. So I would I like to share that kind of context, because I feel like the chief was saying on Saturday, what has changed is the way that we communicate. What has changed is the information that is being put out there, and it's way better than it was before. I mean, these whole discussions, I was just telling somebody the other day, it reminded me 20 years ago when I come into the office and we were all so excited and happy and smiling. And we had a guy from from Pittsburgh visiting, and he's like, "What's up with you guys?" Oh my God, there was a double rainbow on the news today, and he's like in shock, like, "What? Like, what is wrong with you people? Like, I'm from Pittsburgh. You know what that looks like?" I'm like, "No, we had a double rainbow and everybody's happy." And those are the kind of stories we were having. So we were not paying attention to the issues that now we are looking into. So when I love to share every single step of the process that you guys are working on, but I will really, really want to back that up with numbers. When I hear people calling in or people emailing me and talking about the fact is that the numbers are going up or the numbers say whatever, I'm like, yeah, the fact is that we're not reading the data. We're not interpreting the data correctly. That's what the fact is. So if you can help us educate the public on those numbers, I would really, really appreciate it. So I didn't have a question, just a long wind. Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Miadze.
First, I just want to thank you, Ariel, for all the work that you do in the community. I was just having a couple of things that came to my mind. One was faith communities is where a lot of outreach can be done through our community. And I can definitely, the other colleagues that talked about our blogs being a resource or just using us, we got to definitely stop the bleeding before we can attend to the wound. So anything that we can do to help outreach this and preventive wise, I would love to do. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Alder. Really appreciate everybody being willing to help support this work and spread the word. And I know that Ariel will be calling on all of you as needed to do that. I don't see any other alders in the queue. Are there any final questions? Or Ariel, did you have anything that you wanted to end with?
I will just end with a thank you all for being willing to help. We really appreciate it, and we will be in touch.
Thank you. And don't go too far. But President Abbas, I'll turn it over to you to formally transition us to the next item.
Perfect. We will move to the next item, agenda item number 4, file number 67058. It's an update item on COVID-19.
Thank you, President Abbas. And I'm going to just have, again, a few comments up front and then ask Ariel to share more updates from public health. So starting on the city side, I just wanted to update you. We are moving forward with the policy for employees to either provide proof of vaccination or get a weekly COVID test. So we'll be sharing more details with employees and all of you shortly on that. I also wanted to just emphasize that there are a lot of options out there in our community for places for people to get vaccinated if they haven't been already, or to get tested if they need to. And the best resource for finding that is Public Health's website. So I just, speaking of drawing on all of your ability to communicate with your constituents, I would really ask that you regularly have in rotation in your public communications, whether that's your blogs or your social media, or if you're going to neighborhood events or meetings, to please be sharing the information about the availability of the vaccine and the availability of testing, so that we're getting the word out as far as possible. And you can now share, between now and Labor Day, share the good news that folks are eligible for a $100 gift card from the state if they get back their first vaccine shots between now and Labor Day. So I'd encourage people to really get that word out there. I also wanted to just touch briefly on the emergency order, the masking order, and acknowledge that none of us really wanted to be in the position of having to have public health orders again. But with the Delta variant and the direction that cases were moving, I think we all felt like it was important to take that step for our community. I'm sure you all have seen that we have been sued, or public health has been sued for that mask order. We expect to hear from the Supreme Court maybe yet this week, whether they will take the case directly or whether it will go through the normal court system process. So stay tuned for that. I also know that I certainly have, public health and the county executive all have, and I know you all have as well, been hearing from arts organizations requesting an exemption to the masking order. I just say that, we are trying to very closely follow the CDC guidance here. And the CDC doesn't currently recommend an exemption for performances or arts organizations. So we did not include that in our order, and would feel like we need to stay pretty close to what the CDC is recommending, just on a continual basis. So I think it's a difficult and unfortunate situation. I sincerely hope that when this order is set to expire, that we will be in a position to not have to renew it, because everybody has gotten vaccinated that is eligible. But honestly, that is, I think, what it's going to take. I'm really heartened by the full final approval of the Pfizer vaccine. I'm hoping that will allow more folks to feel confident and to go ahead and get the shot. I know that we keep saying this, but they, at the national level, folks are diligently working on a vaccine for folks under 12. And hopefully that will be available in this country yet this year at some point. I think that will make a big difference. At this point, I think we really are trying to keep kids safe as they head back to school. So a lot going on. I know we all had hoped to be through with this by now, but alas, we are not. So I will turn it, Ariel, over to you to see if there's anything else that you want to emphasize from the public health perspective, or anything that I missed.
Sure. I've got a couple of data updates and then just a general update on kind of where we are in public health's response. So this is a lot of data and a lot of information as things have changed pretty rapidly, I would say, over the last 2-ish weeks. So if there's anything you need me to repeat at the end or elaborate on, feel free to do so. From the data, you can always view the latest daily data. It can be found on our dashboard, which is at publichealthnbc.com. And it's updated daily at around 10 a.m. Cases are stable locally, and they're also leveling off statewide and nationally, which is a good sign. Our 7-day average currently is 91.4 cases per day. For some additional context, last week it was 91.9 cases per day. We are at a 4.1% positivity. Last week that was 3.9%, so we are seeing a little bit of an increase there. But for the most part, it is holding steady and has been for around the past 3 weeks, staying between 3.8% and 4.2%. So this is good. It's a good indication that we're testing at the level we need to in order to find cases. And as the mayor mentioned, we have a variety of testing locations around the county, and that can also be found at our website. For additional context, in the past 2 weeks, 53% of cases occurred outside of the city of Madison. So just a couple of general trends of cases. Cases in children still remains very low, but we are seeing an increase in the 8 to 11-year-old age group. Average of 4.9 cases per day in our 0 to 4. Last week, it was the same at 4.9. 4.4 cases in ages 5 through 7. Last week it was at 3. We've got 7.3 cases in ages 8 to 11. Again, last week that was 4.7, so that's where we're seeing an increase. And we have 3.7 cases in the 12 to 17 age group. And last week that was at 5.7, so that's come down a little bit. We have added a section to our data snapshot that is also released on our website, highlighting trends among children in Dane County. We received quite a bit of questions on that, so we started including that data in our snapshot. We are not yet detecting increases in severe outcomes among children, which is great. And we are still keeping an eye on that kind of through our hospitalization data. So moving towards our hospitalizations, people hospitalized with COVID in Dane County hospitals has increased. Yesterday, there were 82 hospitalizations, and 23 of those hospitalizations were in the ICU with COVID. We aren't able to detect if the increase in hospitalizations is due to transfers from out of county, due to some health systems being unable to provide public health with this data. We also, just for additional context, aren't able to tell at this point if COVID is the primary reason people are hospitalized or if they are being hospitalized for other reasons and subsequently have COVID. As we are averaging people hospitalized with COVID is 68.4. That is up from last week. Last week it was 49.9. And in the ICU, we are also seeing a little bit of an increase in 21.4 people in the ICU with COVID. Last week it was 14.3. And so again, hospitalizations of people with COVID has been increasing over the past month in Dane County, also in Wisconsin and across the US. So we are seeing very similar trends nationwide. But we have not seen an increase in Dane County or Wisconsin for children hospitalized with COVID, which is great. And so for some general overall comparisons, Dane County is at about 17.3 cases per 100,000 per day. Wisconsin is at 19.9 cases per 100,000 per day, and the US is at 37.5 cases per 100,000 per day. So that is all of our data on kind of where we are. Testing, last week we averaged about 2,314 tests per day countywide. This week we saw about 2,392, so still on par, and again, not maxing out that capacity. And so we've got plenty of testing options for anybody who would need it. Vaccination update, we have had 728,816 doses administered to Dane County residents. 71.8% of our county population now has at least one dose, which is phenomenal. 82.6% of our eligible population, that's those 12 and up, now have at least one dose. And 80.3% of adults 18 and older have completed their series. We also have an average of 568 doses administered per day, which is up 18% from the 480 doses per day 4 weeks ago. So it's great to see those numbers increasing. And so we are also seeing, as we've talked about, right, we're seeing the Delta variant prevalence, and it has changed the COVID landscape. And the main reason, and is the main reason that the CDC has reinstated masking recommendations. So 94% of cases in July that we've seen have been sequenced with the Delta variant. So it is absolutely the primary variant and strain of COVID that we are seeing here. So all of that great data has had some different implications for public health. A few weeks ago, we had significantly scaled down our response. And as many of us a few weeks ago were kind of feeling a little bit of the pause. And now we are right back ramping up all of our efforts. And so we began increasing our staff capacity for contact tracing. And so as the cases began to increase, we initiated sections of our existing surge plans to accommodate those increasing cases. Specifically, we brought back 21 full-time contracted contact tracers for our disease control team, 15 who have already started, and 6 more will start next week. This is great for us. It means that so far we haven't had to shift any permanent staff back into contact tracing work, which has allowed us to continue our other critical services that we provide. As the mayor mentioned, testing is available. We have 43 free sites within Dane County. That includes the site that Public Health Madison Dane County runs at our South Park Street Clinic, independent pharmacies, your CVS's, your Walgreens, Hy-Vee, and a couple of other locations. All have results within 48 to 72 hours and are free. And let's see, and vaccination planning. So with the recent news of third doses for immunocompromised individuals, as well as the recommendation for booster doses in late September, with the addition of yesterday's news with Pfizer being approved by the FDA, we are actively working with our healthcare partners to plan for additional administration of vaccination doses. We are also developing our plans internally and will reconvene with healthcare partners early next week. And in the interim, we're still holding vaccination clinics at our SMO, our South Madison site, and also our East Washington offices as well. Oh, and as well as providing mobile clinics in the community. And part of our planning process continues to be to use data to find pockets of unvaccinated individuals throughout the city and the county, and working with community partners to establish clinics in those areas. I will put in a little bit of an ask. I feel the question may be coming of what can you all do? And one thing we would really appreciate you all doing is sharing your story about why you were vaccinated, and having a conversation with those without judgment to share facts about the vaccine who maybe aren't vaccinated yet. And we're here to help with any messaging or any talking points you may need for that. And if you have any questions, we've already developed kind of a how-to tool. And that's also on our website. So it's at publichealthmdc.com. It's in our blog section, and it's called How to Be a Vaccine Champion. And that is all I've got for the COVID update. I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Ariel. Alder Wahelahe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ariel, for the great work. Like everyone else, just let us know how we can help. One question I have is, as you have 48 sites for the testing with limited hours of operation, are there any plan to increase those sites, especially with the public health?
Yeah, great question. So right now, we are looking at kind of our surge plans for testing. So if our testing capacity were to start to hit its maximum availability, that we would start to have contingency plans for that. Right now, we aren't really close to exceeding our capacity countywide. And so we don't have any current plans to expand at this time, but we are building kind of what we call our surge plans for if we were to need an increased availability in testing, and also working with our healthcare partners as we did kind of the first go around to see what capacity they may also have and what makes sense to get tested in a healthcare setting versus maybe in a public health setting or at your local pharmacy or retailer.
And another follow-up question is, a lot of people have the confidence that once they have the vaccine, then they don't get COVID. Do you have any data that indicates that, even if you are vaccinated, you are able, you might get the Delta variants?
Yeah, our team is currently working on producing some data that will hopefully be public facing around, we call it breakthrough, what the breakthrough rate is from the vaccine. I don't believe we have that ready just yet, but we'll make sure that you all are aware of when we do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. This question is for Ariel. It's great to hear how much capacity we have as far as testing, and that we're preparing our surge plans so that we're ready if the testing needs increase. I'm wondering, so the positivity rate has stayed very solidly under 5%, but it does seem like it's been creeping up. Does the data look like we should expect to approach 5%? Does it look like it's leveling off, or is it just too difficult to tell at this point?
Yeah, I think it's too difficult to tell at this point. And that's, I think, due to some of the data updates I've received. We have kind of been inching up and then inching down. And so I think we are just doing everything within our power to keep that inching down, even if it's small. And I would say that's really where our focus is just trying to stay below that 5%. But I think it's too soon to tell where we may be headed.
All right, great. Thank you. This question is probably for the mayor. I'm wondering, I know that the overwhelming majority of city staff have been vaccinated, which is wonderful. I'm wondering if we know whether there are departments with larger concentrations of unvaccinated folks. Do we have any way of knowing whether there is a lot of city staff that are interacting with the public who are unvaccinated? I'm just wondering if we have any data around that.
Yeah, it's a good question, Alder. We don't really at this point. We did do, as you know, an initial survey several months ago. And we do have some breakout information by agency there, but I would hope that it's not relevant anymore because more people have gotten vaccinated since then. But I hope that as we start to implement this requirement for staff to provide proof of vaccination, that we will be able to target a little better where if there are agencies that have a lower rate of vaccination, that we'll be able to work with those agencies more directly to make vaccination more accessible to those folks, or to communicate well about any reluctance or barriers there. But I think at this point in time, I wouldn't say that we have enough data to draw any conclusions.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
But rest assured, Alder, I'm definitely thinking about that.
Yeah, I know.
Definitely something that we need to be tracking and taking into account, and encouraging people in every way we can to get vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions about the pandemic or COVID-19? All right, President Abbas, I'll turn it back to you then.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Public Health, and also Madam Mayor. We will move to the discussion item. Next is agenda item number 6, file number 66906. Excuse me. Budget overview and amendment process. Dave, floor is yours.
Thank you, Council President Abbas and council members and mayor. We do have a few slides that we'll walk through with you, Christine and I, and we're great. We're ready to go. So what we're going to try to cover with you today is reviewing and adopting this upcoming capital and operating budget and the process around that. You want me to cover the agenda, Christine?
Sure, you can go ahead.
Okay. So first, we'll give you an overview of the budget process, distinguish between what the capital budget is versus the operating budget, give you that sense of timeline, including the budget hearings and the finance committee and council roles once the executive budget is introduced. And some of the limitations that we all face, both you as the council and the mayor, in developing the budget and the total spending amount and revenue amount that are available in the general and library fund budgets. Next, we'll turn to the budget hearings, how that process works, some of the approaches in developing amendments to the executive budget, who to talk with, when to start that process, and Christina will walk through an example of developing an amendment. And then we also have an appendix attached that just reiterates, I think, the challenges that are faced with putting together the 2022 city operating budget, including the impact of COVID on our revenues, as well as our ongoing and persistent structural deficit, meaning our ongoing costs compared with ongoing allowable revenues. So first we'll talk about the budget process itself, what we call a budget 101, kind of the basics, and the timeline, as well as role and limitations. So the sort of basics of the budget, we have two budgets, the capital budget and the operating budget. The executive capital budget will be introduced a week from today, and then we'll move through the legislative process after that. The operating budget will be introduced in October. Both are really planning documents. They really outline how funds will be allocated to the services that the city provides, as well as connecting those services to our elements of a great city that are really laid out in the Imagine Madison plan. So when we talk about the capital budget, it's really that focus on infrastructure, so physical infrastructure like our street network, our bike lanes, building improvements, acquiring equipment such as computers, buses, our fleet vehicles, and so on. These investments are really about making sure that our city is prepared for climate change, for example, helping to advance goals around affordable housing, making sure that our infrastructure is in good working order from an asset management perspective so that we don't have more costs in the future to repair or replace deteriorating buildings, equipment, streets, and so on. Capital budget is primarily paid for through borrowing. So we sell debt to investors and then we repay that debt usually over a 10-year period with interest. We also have special assessments, as you're aware of, that are placed on property to pay for specific types of projects, as well as impact fees that are paid by developers, user fees, for example, in the water utility. And then we also have federal and state grants that are received. Those are primarily in the area of our major streets projects, for example, but also to acquire some of our transit equipment and other types of infrastructure. So that's the capital budget. The capital budget also includes the year ahead that we're planning for, which is much more specific, but also a 5-year capital improvement plan after that. And that really recognizes that our capital budget projects around those types of activities are often multi-year in nature, and maintaining those assets or improving those assets requires planning, as well as often multiple steps of approval, and then ultimately bidding for construction. And so we have to have that all in place to know what we need to do in the future and how to plan for that and plan the resource allocation for it. So that's the capital budget. The operating budget is really what you see every day in the daily services provided by the city to city residents. And so it's our streets division staff, for example, picking up trash and recycling or plowing the streets, and our library staff, our park staff, and so on. So it's paying the salaries and fringe benefits of that staff to deliver those services. It also pays community organizations to provide services on behalf of the city. So in the area of job training or the areas that you've talked about earlier in your meeting about services to homeless individuals in our city and so on. This is where we ensure residents have those core city services. Most of the operating budget, when we talk about the general and library fund, which is really the great majority of the activities that go on in the city, are paid for by property taxes. So about 3/4 of the city's general fund, it comes from property taxes. We also have what are called charges for services. Those will be those discrete activities the city provides, for example, ambulance conveyance fees. We charge for that service. We also have user fees that pay for operating costs in our enterprise funds, for example, water utility, elements of the Manoa Terrace budget, and sewer and stormwater activities are also paid for by user fees. Then we also have some federal and state aid, which help fund the budget. And that'll be, as you are aware, a major part of both the capital and operating budget for not only 2022, but this year, 2021 as well. All right, so we've talked about the basics of a capital versus operating budget. And we have an annual budget process for both the capital and operating budgets. And really that process continues throughout the entire calendar year. The council sort of sees it at the end of the process in effectively the last quarter roughly of the year when you see what the is proposed by the mayor in her executive budget. But really starts in January and March through March, that first quarter, where we're looking at what do we need to continue current services, what sort of funding levels do we need to do that? That's what we call our cost to continue process. That might mean looking at all of the positions in the city, all the people in those positions, they're eligible for longevity adjustments, for example, or other sort of pay type increases related to their position. We have to look at those sorts of things. Any sort of contracts for services, for example, in information technology that might need to be updated to continue the service level that we need to have for our IT infrastructure. Also priorities set during that time. And then as that cost to continue is developed, we then turn to the agencies. And as you're aware, the mayor lays out priorities, lays out expectations, may lay out requirements for reduction plans, for example. And then agencies develop both their capital and operating budget proposals between April and July, roughly, the capital budget coming first and then the operating budget. And then those proposals are made to the mayor and made available to you as a council, as well as the public, to see what the agencies have proposed. We're now in the phase of the mayor looking at those agency requests, looking at options of how to develop a balanced budget. We're now at the phase where we have to balance the budget that we submit, or that is submitted by the mayor to the council. And that's the stage that's being developed right now in terms of connecting priorities to funding levels, and what we're allowed to increase our budget based on state law requirements, and then ultimately putting together that balanced operating budget as well as a capital budget that operates within a broader set of guidelines, but nonetheless is focused on priorities as well as reasonable financial approaches. So those budgets are introduced, as I said, and then moves into the legislative phase at the Finance Committee, where hearings are held, amendments are made, both the capital and operating budgets. And then that then culminates in November with the full council looking at both the capital and operating budgets and another opportunity for amending the budget, and then final adoption of both the budget, those two budgets as one budget, and adoption of a resolution that sets the property tax levy for the subsequent year. Just a little bit on public participation in the process. Again, city staff are engaging residents through a number of different channels. Neighborhood resource teams are one, resident surveys. There's participation in multiple master planning efforts that often are realized through the capital budget process and capital improvement plan. And those are sort of, as well as committees, particularly on the operating side, that then result in the establishment of those budget priorities and final development of the budget. And then, as you're aware, there's also several opportunities for the public to provide testimony on the budget, both at the Finance Committee meetings and the full council meetings at several times during the fall. All right, so there are some limitations on the budget. They're primarily on the operating budget, but we'll start with the capital budget, and those limitations are more about a reasonable level of debt, for example, a reasonable level of debt service, meaning the amount that we have to repay each year to or pay each year to retire that debt. I'll start with our bond rating, our debt rating, which is probably one of the key factors in all of this. We do have, and the city has had, the highest rating possible since 1973. And that's a AAA rating. We currently have only had one rating agency rate our debt, and that's Moody's. The factors in that rating include our overall debt burden, so how much debt we have issued to pay for our capital projects, the level of our operating reserves, meaning how much money do we have set aside. We often call this colloquially our rainy day fund. How much do we have set aside? Our target as a city is 15%. Most AAA borrowers, municipalities and other governments like ourselves have a higher percentage of their budget set aside in reserve. The strength of our local economy, that is one of the key factors for us. Having state government and the university, as well as healthcare in our city, is a major strength for us for our AAA rating. And then our overall financial management. Are we reasonable in the use of debt? Are we reasonable in our in balancing our budget and addressing any shortfalls that may occur? Are we reasonable in our estimation of revenues and so on? So that debt, including any sort of pension obligations we may have or other post-employment benefit obligations together, when Moody's looks at that, primarily from, it's the debt that's driving that, but there is some amount of liability in those pension and post-employment benefit areas. We are sort of considered moderate to high in our debt by Moody's when they look at that. Another limitation is in the state constitution, and local governments around the state are limited to having general obligation debt that totals no more than 5% of their equalized value. Now, Madison, relative to the rest of the state, has a relatively high equalized value per capita. And so as a result, our debt levels are about a third of that constitutional limit. And you can see, though, that has increased over the last 10 years. Another way to look at debt is on a per capita basis. And that has gone from a little over $2,000 10 years ago in 2011 to about $3,400. So a 67% increase over the last 10 years. Another way to look at this is debt as a share of personal income. That has also increased, but at a lower rate, about 16%. And again, that reflects the strength of Madison's economy from a personal income and overall personal income measure perspective. And then finally, one of the key factors that we look at in terms of how to size our overall capital budget and the debt that pays for it is debt service. So the debt service we pay each year as a percentage of our total general fund operating budget. That has increased pretty dramatically from under 12% 10 years ago to about 17% today. And so when the capital budget is sized and the amount of borrowing that we're trying to target, we're trying to keep the rate of growth in that debt service share at as slow a rate as possible and try to match it, which is difficult to do given all of the other priorities to the amount of debt that we're retiring each year. And it does benefit the city that most of our debt is paid off in 10 years. That is a significant part of our ability to of our AAA rating from Moody's, as well as keeping our debt levels at least manageable. This is just the picture of what the trends have been in that debt service share of the general fund. You can see that this starts in 2015 and then looks out through the capital improvement plan. So this shows the agency requests for 2022. This is not the executive budget, which you will see introduced next week. These are the agency requests only compared to the 2021 adopted budget. And you can see that right now we're at around 17%, but under what is in the agency requests, that would approach 20%, a little under 20% of debt service share of the general fund budget. And so the mayor, in putting together the executive capital budget, this is one of the limitations, constraints, goals in terms of how to size the capital budget and capital improvement plan. All right, so when we talk about limitations on the capital budget, they're a little more general and ones that we have to kind of keep in mind as we look at our bond rating, as we look at our, how much of our tax base, for example, the revenues that we collect are going to pay debt service rather than operating costs. When we look at the operating budget, the limitations are much more strict and are put on local governments and the city by under state law. So as I said earlier, about 75% of our general fund budget comes from property taxes. And under state law, there is an allowable increase that's set. And those of you probably heard this term many times. They're known as levy limits. The state also has another way that it controls local government budgets, and that's called expenditure restraint. And that limits the rate of growth in spending in the general fund budget. So there is both a revenue limit in effect via levy limits, and then there is a spending limit that's in place through the expenditure restraint program. The expenditure restraint program is more of a carrot and stick type of approach where as long as cities keep the rate of growth and spending below a certain level, which is a combination of the inflation rate, so CPI, and 60% of our net new construction, so the property value added from new construction in the city. We keep our rate of growth below that factor, we get $7 million of state aid. If we don't, we lose $7 million of state aid. So it's a considerable penalty and one that has driven our decision-making on the rate of growth and spending. But it's really the levy limit. There's only so much in terms of revenues that can be raised to pay for the budget, and that is the tighter constraint. We also have to have a balanced budget. I think that's pretty clear. Our revenues have to equal our expenses. And so while we have the agency requests that may create that budget gap that we've talked about, ultimately the executive budget, the mayor has to propose a balanced budget. When that executive budget is presented to the council, will be balanced. Previous budgets, I think, as most of you are aware, have included some amount of levy capacity that's unused, and that's basically been set aside for council amendments. When the operating budget is in front of the finance committee and then the common council, as amendments are proposed, if those amendments increase spending in excess of that allowable levy amount, other actions have to be taken to bring it back into balance. And usually that's manifested itself with, there might be a series of amendments proposed, and then as either the finance committee or the council works through those amendments, we're providing updates as that's happening. And only those amendments are selected ultimately that'll be within the allowable levy amount. And just to note that the operating budget does include debt service on those capital investments. So the debt that is issued, the bonds that are issued, or what are also known as promissory notes issued to pay for our capital projects, we have to pay that back. That's paid back through the operating budget. And so the size of the capital budget does have some impact on the operating budget, both through debt service, but also if those capital budget items, for example, if a new library is constructed, those may result in additional operating costs, or a new fire station, for example. Those facilities need to be staffed, and that also can affect or will have an impact on the operating budget, need to be accounted for and accommodated within these overall limitations. The debt service does not, other than those limitations that I talked about on the previous slide. Again, as we've talked about in a number of different contexts, this has been a long time coming in terms of agreements, intergovernmental agreements between the city of Madison, the city of Fitchburg, and the town of Madison that will see the town of Madison dissolve itself next year. So that will be October 31st of 2022, which means that the geographic area and the population in that geographic area that currently is in the town of Madison will be divided between the two cities, with most of the land area and property value, probably close to 70% of both of those, coming into the city of Madison, the remainder going to the city of Fitchburg. And so that means additional services. The city has to provide services to those new residents and new areas that'll be added to the city. And so those include one-time costs and ongoing costs that will begin in 2022, basically the last 2 months of 2022. Now, I referenced earlier the expenditure restraint limits and the levy limits. There are provisions within state law that allow those to be adjusted if services are added due to adding additional land and population to the city through either annexation or a similar process to this, where a government might dissolve. And so our capital and operating budgets will need to be adjusted to address those additional services, like providing elections in that new part of the city, trash and recycling pickup, public safety, and so on. And so the 2022 capital and operating budget that'll be before you will include some additional costs associated with that. And we're currently, as I said here, we're currently in discussions with the State Department of Revenue on when and to what extent we can make those adjustments to our allowable levy increase, as well as our allowable spending increase, to accommodate those the cost of those added the cost of services to for the residents of what are now currently in the town of Madison and in that geographic area.
If you don't mind, I will ask the staff to just quickly check the quorum. Couple of alders left, so I just want to make sure we are 5 alders here. Madeline?
Yes, from what I can see, we have you, President Abbas, we have Alder Carter, we have Alder Heck, Alder Lemmer, and Alder Wehelier. We need all 5 of you, or a minimum of 5, to maintain quorum throughout the rest of the meeting, and especially when it comes to our last agenda item, number 6, the 2022 Common Council meeting dates.
Thank you. Sorry, Dave, for interruption. I just want to we have go ahead, please.
All right, so the next element of this presentation, this primer on the budget process, will be the budget hearings and amendment process, or what to expect, how to prepare, considerations, and so on. So first of all, when we look at the 2022 budget, and we've talked about this again in a number of different contexts, when we look at that cost to continue, as well as the agency requests, and we compare it with that allowable increase in the property tax levy, as well as what we expect to get from the state in terms of state aid, and then as well as our other revenues, like charges for services and so on, what we expect to get from that based on economic activity or construction activity and so on. We have a gap of about $18 million that needs to be closed to get to a balanced budget. And that's what the mayor will present as part of the executive operating budget in early October. And Appendix A, so the attached appendix to this presentation, gives you further background on that. Agencies have submitted their operating requests, and have included in that are proposed reductions. Agencies were asked to identify reductions equal to 5% of their budget, which means that the mayor's office, the agency heads are currently engaged in a prioritization process where certain efficiencies might be generated, as well as difficult choices to get to that balanced budget. And that's what you will see, particularly when the operating budget is brought forward in early October. There continues to be the focus as looking through that lens of racial equity and social justice. And new this year, agencies were asked to provide a lot more detail and answer some key questions on how their services advance those racial equity and social justice goals. And then really sort of taking those goals to that next step is, again, as we've talked about, is Results Madison, about really looking at the city budget and everything that we do through services. And those services are connected back to our elements of a great city. And then how are we doing with those services relative to the results that our residents expect? And we do that through performance measures and applying data with how are we doing relative to those investments, and should we be investing more or less in certain areas. I'm going to, I think I'm doing this one, and then I'm turning it over to Christine after this one, I believe. So how can you prepare, particularly for the capital budget hearings? So as I said, the capital budget, we're going to have that introduced next week. We'll have the budget book itself that'll be online, and we'll have an executive summary that'll give a high level detail, high level sort of summary of the capital budget projects. There's also a story map that we've had for a number of years that you can go and look at all of the projects on a map of the city. Where are they located? There's connections to or links to master plans and other background information on each of the capital budget process. That book will be over 200 pages long. There will be, as I said, the executive summary. There will be variance tables, meaning sort of comparisons to what's in the 2022 budget to the 2021 budget. Where have things been added or projects been deferred? We've had the concept now for a few years of the horizon list. So these are things that aren't in the capital budget or the capital improvement plan yet, but they have been identified perhaps through master planning processes and the agencies. They have a clear community purpose, but they may need more information. They may need to be further defined, perhaps through a planning process. And you might see the funding for the planning in the capital budget, but with the remainder of the project, the construction funds in the horizon list, for example. You'll also see agency by agency, all of the capital projects with descriptions for them, the discrete funding sources, and the discrete expenditure categories within each of those agencies. And it also includes a glossary with specific terminology. So I've done a lot of talking, and now you get to hear Christine kind of walk through the timeline and the amendment process.
Thanks, Dave. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christine Coe. I'm the city's Budget and Program Evaluation Manager, and like a handful of members of the Common Council, this will be my first budget season with the city. So we wanted to clarify the timeline and process for the council hearings, as well as the amendment process, so that we're all on the same page and the process moves forward smoothly. So as Dave mentioned at the very beginning, the city does have two distinct budgets, the capital and operating budget. I'm going to walk through the steps using the capital deadlines first, and then I'll refer to the operating side of the table. So the first step is for the mayor to introduce the executive budget. For the capital budget, that's going to be at the next council meeting on August 31st. And then there will be two finance committee hearings where agencies have an opportunity to present the budgets, and you as alders will have the opportunity to ask questions. For the capital budget, that will be September 13th and 14th. Following those hearings, there will be what we call Amendment Week, and this is when alders can submit requests to our budget analyst team to make amendments, which are typically reductions or increases to the budget. Alders can submit amendments at any point after the budget is introduced, but typically amendments start coming in after the hearings. But Amendment Week is the week of September 20th, and we ask all alders to submit their amendments by Wednesday at noon. So for the capital budget, this is September 22nd. And this allows the analyst team to finish up any financial analysis and send back the final amendment packet to you by Friday at noon. So there's a very short turnaround for the team to process all of the information, and we just ask that you hold those deadlines. Once the amendments are compiled in a packet, the Finance Committee votes on the amendments, and typically these are taken in the order presented, and it's organized in order alphabetically by agency, and some items can be taken out of order. But the Finance Committee vote on amendments is the following meeting on September 27th. And then there's one more opportunity for the council as a whole to vote on amendments, which is the first week of November. Again, there is an amendment week, which is November 1st and 5th. Within that week, we ask alders to submit amendments by Wednesday at noon, and analysts will have the final packet ready by Friday at noon. So step number 5 will apply to both the capital and operating side. So I'm just going to quickly go through the dates on the operating side. For the operating budget, the mayor will introduce the executive operating budget on October 5th. Finance committee hearings will take place on October 11th and 12th. And the Finance Committee Amendment Week will take place the week of October 18th, with alders submitting amendments by Wednesday, October 20th, and final amendments published on the 22nd. The Finance Committee vote on operating amendments will be on October 25th. And again, there is that second opportunity at the City Council meeting in November, where anything that did not make it through the Finance Committee process can be brought to the table. And then finally, there are 3 City Council meetings scheduled in November to vote on amendments and adopt the budget, and that is November 9th, 10th, and 11th this year. So to break down the process a little more, we thought about it as the who, what, when, where, why, and how of submitting an amendment. So to take things a little bit out of order, first starting with the why. Why would you submit an amendment? This is really an opportunity for this Common Council to engage in the process and propose changes, whether that's increasing or decreasing existing projects or programs. This is a key input into developing what becomes the adopted budget for the upcoming year. So if you're interested in submitting an amendment, any alder can propose an amendment. If you are in the Finance Committee, you can submit either during the Finance Committee process or during the Common Council process that takes place in November. If you're not a Finance Committee member, you can request the Council President to introduce an amendment on your behalf during the Finance Committee Amendment Week, or you can wait until the Council process in November. So if you're thinking about an amendment, what information should you include? So first, at a minimum, you should know the agency that would be impacted by the amendment, the program, project, or service that you are proposing to amend, and then have a brief description of the proposal. A little further down, we'll talk about process and how the budget team and agency staff can help you build out the proposal. But this is kind of the minimum to get you started, and staff can help you fill in the details. And again, I wanted to reiterate some of the deadlines. You can start submitting amendments at any point after the executive budget is introduced, but typically this process starts after the agency hearing, so you can get additional information about what is in the proposals. And again, we ask you to hold these deadlines to give the budget team enough time to analyze and finalize the requests. So for the Finance Committee capital budget, that's Wednesday, September 22nd at noon. The Finance Committee operating budget amendments, that's Wednesday, October 20th at noon. And the City Council full budget is Wednesday, November 3rd at noon. And this is always the Wednesday following the week of the hearings. So finally, the kind of potentially most important is the where and how do I submit my requests. So since we're all still in this hybrid format, there is no where, everything will be online. In terms of the how, we will, these are kind of some basic steps to walk you through the process. As alders, you'll submit requests to the budget analyst via email, and we have the contacts listed in a further slide. The analyst will complete financial analysis of the requests and send back a draft for your approval. There might be some back and forth on details, which is why we ask you to get it to us as soon as possible. So if there's any clarification needed, we can make sure that the final version is the closest to representing your idea. So after the analyst sends you back the draft and you approve it, you have the option to circulate your amendment with your peers for co-sponsorship. And then the analysts will compile a final amendment packet. They'll send it to you via email by that Friday deadline, and then we'll publish it online shortly thereafter. Our budget web address is thecityofmadison.com/finance/budget/2022. And that's where you'll see all of our materials. And then again, the amendments themselves will be taken up in the following Finance Committee or Common Council meeting, typically in the order of the packet, but it can be taken out of order. This is just a sample of an 2021 capital amendment. You can see here that the very top of the page has some basic information about the agency, the name of the project, a brief description. And then because it's a capital budget, as Dave mentioned, we're not only planning for the upcoming year, but also have a 5-year outlook. So here you can see the amount proposed for 21 as well as the next 5 years. The operating budget format will be slightly different than this. But it has the amendment amount as well as some debt service assumptions because, again, the debt service is paid back in the capital budget or in the operating budget. After this kind of introductory section that lays out the identifying information and description, there will be a brief analysis prepared by the budget team that has a background on the project, including whether it was proposed in prior capital improvement plans, as well as any operating impacts. And this is what Dave mentioned, where capital projects might have operating impacts associated with a completed project. And then after the amendment, we will update all these forms to have the results, which is the outcome of the vote. And here you can see that this amendment was adopted unanimously. So this is just a snapshot. I know it might be a little hard to read, but these are the basic elements. And again, you don't have to have all of these details when you have an idea. You just need to have kind of the basics, and the budget team will help you build this out. And then I have one example of walking through what a amendment process could look like, and then just one slide with contact information, and then we'll open it up to questions. So in this scenario, we talk about, what considerations should you have in mind when proposing a new or potentially expanded capital project? This all starts with having the idea for an amendment. So if you as alders have a thought about how to potentially increase or expand a project. For example, if you want to expand affordable housing funding or add a new park shelter, that's kind of step one. You have the idea. So what do you do next? The second step is really vetting the idea and evaluating some of the factors that go into developing this into a full amendment. Something to note is that a lot of agencies have strategic plans that guide their work and put forth a timeline for projects. And there may be some of your ideas that are already in plans for future years, or agencies might have some other higher priority needs that they want to address immediately. So some questions to think about while you're proposing an amendment is, first, is this project in an existing agency work plan? City work plans or proposals like Metro Forward or Housing Forward might have some of the answers to knowing whether or not this is in the scope for the immediate future. Another question is your project on the horizon list? As Dave mentioned, the executive capital book will have a horizon list of projects that have been proposed but aren't fully developed enough to be included in our in the CIP, the capital improvement plan. So the work in developing the idea might already exist, but be on the horizon list. A third question you could ask is, does the agency have the capacity to implement? Just because an agency has funding for a project doesn't necessarily mean they have the staff capacity or planning capacity to implement it as you laid out. So that is an important factor to consider. And then finally, are there operating budget impacts? Again, with completing a new building or facility, the cost of operating that will be in the city's budget long after the project itself is completed. So, these are a lot of factors to consider. So as you're thinking about how to put together an amendment, agency staff and budget analysts will be available to answer these questions. Again, the best way to start working on this is to reach out to staff early in the process to allow time to follow up on specific ideas. The final step is, after you're reviewing the considerations that you might have thought through in step 2, is to go back to your original idea and make adjustments as needed. You might decide to scale back or change the proposal, but once you have that, in good shape, you can work with the budget analyst team to finalize the amendment and make sure that it's completed by the Wednesday deadline. So here we have a snapshot of the employee net page that has all of the budget staff and portfolios. We have a team of 4 great budget analysts that are each responsible for about a quarter of the city agencies. So if you go to this employee net /finance/budget page, you'll see their name, the agencies that they work with, and then you can get a hyperlink to their email address, and they can also send that directly to all of the alders. And if you're not sure who to contact, you can reach out to me directly at ckoh@cityofmadison.com. So with that, we can turn it over to questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate that, Christine. Alder Figuraco.
Just a quick question from that presentation. Hold on, let me move away from that. So do we, is there a form, like a formalized form that we can complete for those amendments, or do we just make our own document as we go along?
So there is not a formal form that you submit. What you would do is email the budget analyst who works with the agency that you'd like to make the amendment with, and they will work with you to get the cost details and formalize the details. So I would say that when you email the analysts, you should include the agency name, a brief description, and then they'll help with the formal financial analysis to be able to fill out the details on the form that I previewed.
Thank you. I mean, I will suggest, I think it will make everyone's life easier if we just put like a quick Word document with your where, why, what, whatever, because you were asking for very specific information, and I think it will be easier to follow a form and avoid so much back and forth between the analysts and the rest of us. But I mean, just as a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that feedback. I think we can consider that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions? Alder Vihele.
Thank you, President Abbas, and thanks, Christine, for this wonderful presentation. I think Dave said that each agency are asked how their services advances the RESG goals. How can we access those questions, or how can we access those information for each agency as they prepare their budget in the lens of RESG analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can actually pull up, let me just, in the agency proposals, there is a specific section where they talked about the implications for racial equity and social justice. And I can just pull up a sample. So here I went to the finance page. I went to the 2022 agency requests and opened up one of the agencies. And every single proposal has a specific section labeled racial equity and social justice. And then you can see their responses to how that specific project advances those goals. And then we'll also have it summarized in the executive summary and the executive budget proposal. So it's in multiple places, including if you wanted to, we're working on finalizing the executive budget right now, but if you wanted to preview what agencies have proposed already, it's included in the agency request, which you can review now.
And has there been, because of the current situation in terms of the racial equity and social justice, has there been an increase in the either budget, the operation budget, in attaining to those lands or to those communities, particularly the Black and Brown communities?
I can't say offhand right now if there were increases to specific budgets relative to serving Black and Brown communities, but I will say that as part of developing the budget, we did have representatives from the ResJ team be part of all of the management conversations to decide on what would go into the executive budget. And we did incorporate feedback from the NRTs and other stakeholders related to equity impacts on specific proposals. And in terms of the specific amounts or what that looks like, I would need to go back to look at the budget overall.
And would you be able to share that with me or with the other council members as we look into this lens of ResG analysis? The reason why I ask is a lot of the time people have the implication of using the ResG analysis and there's no impact. So how can we be very intentional in using the ResG analysis or ResG lens in terms of making impact in the community that we serve? So I'm just curious as if there's any change or any implication in the process. So if you can share any information, that would be greatly appreciated.
Alder, I understand what you're trying to get at, but I think it's very difficult to provide you with the information that you're asking for. We don't track our services by race or ethnicity. So there really isn't any way for us to estimate how much money we're spending on a particular racial or ethnic group. And I'm not sure that would be appropriate anyway. So I don't really think we can answer that question for you, Alder. But in terms of taking into account the ResJ implications of budget items, that's the whole point of having agencies report on their impacts, is so that as we put together the budget, as I put together my executive budget, and then as you consider amendments, you can go into those requests and you can see, just for example, here's a service that I feel like is inequitable or is not having the desired impact on the community, and so I'm going to propose cutting it. Or here's a supplemental request that I think is well justified and does speak to racial equity, and I'm going to propose funding it. That's why that information is there, is to help guide our decision-making process. And it's there for, or at least it ought to be there for literally every service that an agency provides. So that's a lot of information that's available to you to evaluate along, through the ResJ lens if you want to.
And I understand. And, when we look at the ResG analysis, it specifically says racial equity, social justice, and who are those impacted by? It's particularly PIPAC communities. And if we cannot have the impact or the impact analysis, then it's mute to have this kind of conversation. So I'm just wondering, I'm not saying that
I would
particularly...
suggest that you actually, that you look at the budget submissions and see if they speak to your question.
I understand, but you're saying that you cannot be able to report specific groups if they have been on the budget or not. And I'm not asking that. I'm just asking the implication and the impact of the budget based on ResG analysis. And that's the answer I'm not getting, unfortunately. So what's the use of having the ResG analysis if we cannot get the impact or the impact analysis or the implication of this particular lens?
But that's exactly the information that we've asked agencies to provide, is what is the impact of their service.
And that's the questions I have. Lens. So that's the answer I need. But you jump to you jump to the conclusion of answering the wrong question, unfortunately.
Alder, I heard you very specifically ask for how much money we're spending on BIPOC communities, which is not a thing that I think we can estimate. we can and do ask every agency to provide information about the impact of their services through a ResJ lens. And all of that information is available in the agency request.
And that's the information I need.
But it's all available to you, Alder.
How can I get it?
It's on the website, Alder.
So the website that I pulled up is the City of Madison. I'll pull it up one more time. It's the cityofmadison.com/finance/budget/ if you just go to the budget page, so it's finance/budget, you can see agency requests. These have been published, available online since May 25 for the capital budget. And again, you can click either all agency requests or by agency. And each of these, I just clicked the first one. You can just do a control sign for racial equity and social justice. And every single proposal will have this section in the form. So similarly for the operating budget, the agency requests have been online since July 9th. You can click on that link. And then again, I'm just selecting the first one as an example. There's this transmittal memo, and then each proposal will have a section on racial equity and social justice. So it's all here. You can do all agencies, or if you're interested in specific agencies and services, the fastest link is cityofmadison.com/finance/budget, and it'll be the first links you'll see on the page.
Thanks, Christine.
Welcome, Alder.
Thank you, Alder Vahili. I saw Alder Figueroa, your hand was raised. Do you want to wish to speak or not?
No, I mean, nothing. I think Christy answered the question. I mean, the information is already in the website. I do agree that this the ResG discussion that should happen in a different setting. We should definitely be looking into how we use ResG in general, not necessarily on this time with the budget, but in general, and really understand how the tool is applied, and if we can tweak it a little bit to make sure that the impact is what we're expecting. But so it's a valid conversation. But regarding the budget, it is it's everything on the website. But I really do encourage all of us to really question the ResG process and how that works in the general context of it. Because I do have many questions about that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Vahili, your hand is raised. Do you have any other questions? Thank you. Any further questions? Alder Figueroa, your hand is raised. Oh, okay. I do not see any more questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
We will move to agenda item number 6, legislative file number 66694. Madeline, floor is yours regarding proposed 2022 Common Council meeting dates.
Yes, absolutely. So the meeting dates were brought up at a prior CCEC meeting. There were some questions asked about what the holiday MGOs are, what kind of holidays the city recommends that we avoid. I have a list of those attached to the file. Additionally, during the meeting, there were some questions raised about what dates we were meeting on next year. And after CCEC, Finance did reach out to state that the current schedule as it had been written in version 1 did interfere with their budget process for next year. So the biggest 2 changes in the version 2 of next year's Common Council meeting dates would be the change for in version 1, we were going to be meeting on July 5th. In the updated version, we have pushed that back to July 12th to accommodate the 4th of July. A lot of alders are out of town at that point in time. And then the secondary change would be we pushed a meeting on Tuesday, October 18th to Tuesday, October 25th to try and help finance and accommodate their schedule and make things a little smoother. So those are the biggest changes. Do you have any questions for me about the schedule for next year?
Alder Lemmer, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you so much. I can only imagine the amount of work and back and forth that went into this. So I appreciate you. I am wondering, I did notice and I didn't catch it before and I wish that I had. I think September 6th falls within Rosh Hashanah and it looks like we have a meeting on that date. And I'm wondering perhaps if we could look into that. Because it looks like Rosh Hashanah is one of the holidays that the MGO says that we should not be meeting during.
Yes, absolutely. Let me look into that right.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Yes, no problem at all, Alder Lemmer. If it does meet on Rosh Hashanah, I can definitely update that meeting date to a day we are not meeting.
Patty, Rosh Hashanah in 2022 is Sunday, September 25th through Tuesday, September 27th.
Oh, I was looking, I was thinking 2021. I'm sorry. It's been a really long day. Sorry, Paul.
It
Thank you.
every year.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I'm looking at the calendar I referenced online now, and it should be September 26th next year. So hopefully we have all our bases covered with this updated version, but are there any other inconsistencies anyone's noticing? Because if not, we can definitely just finalize this for next year and I can draft a resolution to be taken up at the next council meeting.
I do not see any hand raised. Any question or concerns? All right. Perfect. So if that's the case, then I need a motion to adjourn. I believe Alder Lemon, this is a motion to adjourn. And Alder Heck, that's second. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks.